All right. I believe we are live. Kitty, you want to open things up for us?
Yes, I do. And my Roomba started as soon as we went live. Oh my goodness, that's so loud.
The Roomba's live too.
It is fixed. Roomba is live. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Science Saturday. I am always so excited, but today I am exceptionally more excited because I am pretending that I am in St. Croix, one of my favorite places. We are so lucky to have our hosts this month are from the Seashell Museum. And I would like to point out, in honor of the seashells, my virtual background painted by my mom, all about seashells. So we're gonna have a really, really fun time this week. We're gonna talk about shells and where they come from and why you can't take them. And live from, I feel like I'm watching Saturday Night Live, and live from St. Croix, we have the Seashell Museum. Yay! Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Kitty, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the St. Croix Seashell Museum. We are located here at the beautiful St. George Village Botanical Garden. I'm going to take you on a quick tour through the museum, and Debbie Warden is going to do a more in-depth tour later on, but we'll just go inside and show you what we have around. Our front and center exhibit is the Queen Conch. It is the territorial seashell of the Virgin Islands. We have a growth series of when it's a tiny baby, as it grows, ages, and gets bigger, and finally large enough to be caught by fishermen to have for dinner. Over here, we have an exhibit of African seashells in order of our African history. We have an exhibit of the echinoderms, or urchins, that Marcia Taylor is going to talk about a little bit later. We have a case of bivalves, the clam-like shells that have two shells. We have a big case of worldwide seashells to show the variety, colors, shapes, and sizes of shells from all over the world. And we have things that are made from seashells that people use seashells for crafts. And we have a big exhibit of the gastropods. The gastropods are the one single shell, coiled shell animals. So we're going to talk about these a little bit more specifically. Before I get into all that, Joe, you want to start with the first slide, please?
Yeah, that sounds good. That's quite a collection you guys have. That's really incredible.
Beautiful. I'm really enjoying this tour, and I'm pretending that I am there with you in St. Croix. My friends know that that's really where I would rather be, especially in the gardens. Goodness.
Okay, so let's see here. So there's the presentation for you.
Okay, I wanted to tell you just a little bit about the Seashell Society. We were founded in 2014. We have our permanent home here at the Botanical Garden, but when we started, we opened in Fort Frederick in 2015 and then moved to the garden. We are a nonprofit organization, and we are a project of the St. Croix Foundation, and we're funded in part by the Virgin Islands Council on the Arts. Next slide. Our collection here at the museum includes 87 bivalves. Those are the ones with two shells. We have 347 gastropods, 13 echinoderms, and 16 things made with shells. So I just kind of showed you all of these guys. Next slide. So what is a seashell? Seashells are mollusks. They have been around for like 65 million years. There's over 30,000 living species known, and there's probably lots more than that that haven't been discovered yet. Most of these guys live in the shallow waters, and they have an average lifespan of 2 to 15 years, but the giant clam in the Pacific that gets huge can live up to 100 years. Next slide. A seashell is an external skeleton that's created by the mollusk. Just like our bodies make our bones on the inside, the seashell creates its skeleton on the outside. It's made of calcium carbonate and that's secreted by the animal wall, and it grows as the animal grows. There are all kinds of shapes, sizes, and colors of seashells, and the animals use their shells for protection, locomotion, or opening objects. And next, I'm going to talk about the seashell architecture, how certain shells have created their shell to help them to live in their environment. So, the first fellow I have here is a tube-making bivalve. Believe it or not, this is a bivalve. If you look really closely, you can see the two little valves. Hopefully, if it can, I don't know if it's in focus or not, but this shell started out as the bivalve. It's called a watering pot. It's from Western Australia, and the seashell doesn't grow as a bivalve anymore. As it grows, it creates these little flowery-like appendages on the bottom side of it, and the shell sets in the mud about up to here, and then it creates this tube that sticks up out of the mud. And scientists think that the animal takes water in out of the mud through these little fancy holes, and then it's able to shoot its siphon up out through the tube, out of the sand to filter feed. So this is a tube-making bivalve.
So Sharon, I know this is something that people talk a lot about with bivalves, right? That they can be really powerful filter feeders. Is that correct? They can filter water really well. Yes, that is
exactly what they are. Yes, yeah. Thank you. Speaking of bivalves, I have a lion's paw scallop. This is a St. Croix seashell. It's called a lion's paw because people thought that it looks like a lion's paw with these knobby things on it. But these knobs are filled with fluid to add stability and strength to the shell. And these guys can actually swim through the water. They clasp their valves together and they can swim. Joe, you want to show the video of the swimming scallop for us?
That's kind of how I swim too. I just kind of clap my hands and move around. It's very ridiculous when I'm diving.
Good one, Kitty.
Very pretty though. Don't worry, guys. I'm a professional diver.
Okay, so looky here. We've got scallop just kind of showing on the bottom. Oh wow.
That is really cool.
Kitty, you think you've ever seen that in the water diving or anything like that?
I have.
Never seen anything moving like that, no. But now I have to. This is my new goal.
Yeah, I have seen a scallop swimming like that, so it's for real.
Absolutely.
Proof.
The next shell I have is a Japanese slit shell. It's from Japan. Very beautiful shell, and it's also the most primitive shell. It has a very big opening, and the animal would come out of the shell to eat and to feed, but apparently it has no way to remove waste from its shell. So it has this slit in its shell that it is created to remove waste. And as you go around the shell, you can see where he's filled in the slit. So as he grows, he fills in the slit.
That's really cool. And I think something that's really interesting about these shells is, as you mentioned in the presentation, they grow with the animal, as opposed to a lot of the shells we see after a crab or something has taken over it. You don't think about the animal that started in there and grew with it. I think that's really cool.
Right. A lot of people think that the crab created the shell, and that is not true. Hermit crabs do not create their shell, and they periodically move from one shell to another as they grow because they outgrow the shell. The next couple of shells I have are spiny shells. This one is a thorny oyster. It's from the Philippines. It is a bivalve, 2 valves. And it grows its spines to make it look bigger. So if an octopus or a fish comes along and they're going to get a mouthful of spines. So part of the spine is protection from predators, and it also adds more surface for growth. So algae or barnacles can grow on the shell to help disguise it so it's not as recognizable as something someone would want to eat if you're an octopus.
My cat thinks that one looks delicious. So she's a predator. But
it also finds not only to make it look bigger, so it's eat, but as it's sitting in mud, the spines help hold it up out of the mud, and it keeps it from sinking. So he has adopted his shell to keep him from sinking.
That is really beautiful and interesting. That's such a beautiful aspect of it. You know, we see the beauty in it, but for the animals making these shells, that's a very usable and important aspect to their makeup. Very cool.
Yeah, they're pretty smart guys. The next I have is a kit of these. You find them occasionally on the beach in St. Croix if you're lucky. These shells are thick and heavy, and that is designed for them to protect them from predators. Even though the helmet is a meat-eating shell, there are other meat eaters who will come along and try to sit on top of the helmet and drill a hole in it, but the shell is nice and thick and it's really hard to get through. So they are protected from predators by their really thick, heavy shell. I have another cute little shell, an Atlantic Distorsio. This one is from Florida, but I believe we do have Distorsios here on St. Croix. And it has a really weird looking opening anyway to kind of keep predators from getting in there. And then it has these teeth that go across the opening to further discourage any predator from being able to get in there and eat on it. And some of my favorites, these are carrier shells. This first one is an Atlantic carrier. It's found on St. Croix. If you were scuba diving or snorkeling along, just looking in the sand, and you saw this pile of rubble, you would never know that it was a seashell. But turn it over, and there's the bottom of the shell. There's the opening where the animal comes out. The animal is able to pick up rubble or shells or coral, rocks, whatever, and place it around on its shell to disguise it from predators. So that's one use. And another use besides camouflage is it holds it up a little bit. You can see it doesn't sit flat, so it holds it up from the sand, and debris collects underneath the shell, and the animal then gets out and eats the junk that's in the debris of the sand.
That is super cool. I've never heard of that. It's like a decorating crab, but
it is.
But it's a mollusk, right?
Yeah.
The shell that uses other shells.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So take a look at this guy. This is a pallet carrier. It's found in the Philippines. it's white, where this guy is a brown color. This guy is a white shell. I guess that's where it gets its pallid name. And it has attached this beautiful sponge to the top of its shell. And then it picked up some pretty other, you talk about a decorator crab. This guy's decorated. He has very pretty little shells spaced along at intervals. Same thing, it hides him from predators and it holds him up out of the mud so he can eat the junk that collects underneath him. That's one of my favorites.
That's certainly one of the most decorated shells I've ever seen. That's
Yeah,
pretty
that's like coffee table book shell. Then we have the chambered nautilus. The chambered nautilus is, it's a cephalopod. It's a relative of the octopus. If you saw this live in the water, the animal lives here in this first section, and it would have squid-like tentacles coming out of the shell. And it floats up and down in the water column to feed. And the way that it's able to do that, we have this beautiful sliced in half section of a nautilus shell. And you can see that each one of the chambers is sealed off. But there is a hole that runs through like a blood vessel. And that's a membrane that the nautilus uses. And each section is filled with fluid and gas, and the gas or liquid in each one of these chambers, and that's how it's able to float up and down like a cork bobbing along. Another pretty ingenious method.
That is absolutely fascinating and beautiful, and kind of reminds me of a swim bladder in fish, but to see how you know, an exoskeleton, are shells exoskeletons? Can we call that? Is it actually a skeleton?
Yes, the shell is an external skeleton.
Okay, so awesome. Yay, Science Saturday. I got something.
Yeah, it makes me think of
Okay.
these serve as kind of the world's oldest like scuba diving VCDs. You know, being able to alter your bladder and alter your buoyancy at will. And these nautiluses are some of the oldest invertebrates that we know. I mean, a lot of these creatures are incredibly old in terms of evolutionary time, right?
Billions of years. This guy is a banded tooth. Ta-da! It's from Costa Rica. It has bands, and it eats barnacles. So it has made itself a little special tooth down here at the bottom of its shell. And as it crawls along on top of a rock that has barnacles, it can stick its tooth into the plates of the barnacle and hold it open while the animal dines on the barnacle. So another great adaptation of, I'll use my shell to help me eat. Then we have a couple of keyhole limpets here. Limpets are used all about water storage. We have a high-spired limpet. They live on rocks along the shoreline. Some are at high tide levels, so they're out of the water for like half the day. So this is the black keyhole limpet from Costa Rica. It has a high spire. It lives high up on a rock, stores water in its hole, and then in its shell. And as the tide comes up, and it doesn't need all the water, it can expel the water through the hole. This is a wobbly keyhole limpet from the Bahamas, and it's a pretty flat little guy. I don't know. It has the keyhole. It lives at the surf level, absorb the crashing waves, and again, it doesn't need to store as much water, so it has a lower peak and it can expel water out of the hole.
Now that's really cool, because I found those on the beaches and never thought about the fact that the hole in the top of the shell was actually part of the animal's life. You know, you find a lot of shells that have holes in them from other predators, but that's just that guy living his life. Although I should have been suspicious that they're always so perfectly centered. I don't think that a predator would be that exact. And now I feel silly. but I learned something else. This has been such an educational Science Saturday for me. So exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you see, it has a pretty little pink ring. It has a pink ring around the keyhole. That cone, you can also find these on St. Croix. Cones are meat-eating seashells, and they poison their victims. They have darts where they can poison their victim long enough to get their mouth in and eat their shell. But there are also shells that would like to eat a cone. So cones have a very narrow opening as a protection against predators to keep them from being eaten. The last guy I have is a fuzzy chitin, and this isn't a gastropod or a bivalve, it's a chitin. It has, pardon me, it has interlocking bands that are attached with a band around the exterior, and they're all attached. And these guys live on rocks. If you probably find these in tide pools or long rocks where the limpets are. And since they can bend either way, whatever way they need to, they're able to adhere to the rock, whatever the surface is that they're climbing on. So it's just totally amazing to me that basically a slug can create something this beautiful. You know, a slug, your garden snail, makes these things, and not only do they make them beautiful, but they make them to fit so that they can live in their environment. So this is what I have for the seashell architecture, and I'm going to turn the program over to Marcia Taylor to talk about the echinoderms.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was really, really cool. And I am so excited to keep on learning more. You ladies have really just like blown my mind this morning. I'm loving
Well, we would like for everyone to come to the museum and see what all we have to show. Okay, Marcia.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about a group of organisms that are in a completely different phylum. Joe, do you have my echinoderm PowerPoint up?
Should be good to go.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, my name is Marcia Taylor. I happen to work for the University of the Virgin Islands, but I'm also a founding member of the St. Croix Seashells Society. And I kind of am in charge of the echinoderms here, which, as I mentioned, is a whole different phylum. So first slide, you can see that the echinoderms, if you look at the little star on the upper left, only make up a small percent of the organisms that live in the sea. Whereas the gastropods, the group that Sharon talked about on the bottom, make up a bit bigger percent. So there aren't as many echinoderms out there as there are gastropods, but I think they're really cool. So echinoderms belong to the phylum Echinodermata, which means spiny skin in Greek. Echino meaning spiny or prickly, and skin meaning derm. And you can see some pictures over here of some of the echinoderms that I'm going to talk about. Next slide. So some features of the echinoderms. They are all marine. You do not find them in fresh water, only the ocean. They live on the bottom. You're not going to find them swimming around in the sea with the fish. They have calcareous skeletons. They are largely nocturnal. That means they come out at night to feed. They move relatively slowly, and we'll have a little video clip showing that. They're non-aggressive. They're not organisms you need to worry about. They just are non-aggressive. Next slide. So I'm not going to talk about all the echinoderms today. I'm going to talk about just the ones we have in the museum, and that's the class Echinoideae, AC, I'm sorry. And that includes the sand dollars and the sea urchins. We don't collect starfish or sea cucumbers here, just the organisms where you would find their shells washed up on the beach. So spines, these organisms have spines. Why do they have spines? What advantage does that give them? Well, first of all, it provides protection. Some urchins have spines that are poisonous. Spines can be used to poke other urchins also. They use their spines for moving. It helps them walk, along with a specialized feature called tube feet, which are found in all echinoderms. They use their spines for burrowing. And they also use their spines for catching food, such as drifting algae. So now I'm going to talk about some of the local echinoderms that we have here, showing both live pictures as well as the skeleton that you might find washed up on the beach. And I'll show you some of these later as well. Probably the one that most people are best familiar with is the long-spined sea urchin. As scientists, we know them as diadema. You can see on the left, it looks kind of like a pincushion with lots of black spines sticking out, which are very, very sharp. You want to stay away from these. They're not going to chase after you, but you don't want to poke them because their spines will go into your skin and be painful.
That makes me think of like horror movie, like Attack of the Diadema, where they're all very slowly coming towards you.
Once this guy dies, as well as all the other echinoderms with spines, there's a little fleshy part that attaches the spine to the skeleton, which we call the test. And that breaks down and you're left with just the test, which is shown here on the right. This is what a diadema test looks like. The next one I'm going to show, probably the next one that most people are familiar with, is called the West Indian sea egg, or just sea egg. These are pretty common, and on the beach especially, we find a lot of these. And then probably the one we find most of is the next slide, the boring urchin. Okay, he uses his spines to bore into things. You find these in very shallow water where you want to be careful in walking. The next one is my favorite. I call it the green urchin, but I think most people call it the variegated meat urchin. And it can't be found in all locations. I know a few places on St. Croix you can find them, and they're just so beautiful. And I'll show you their tests, a few more of their tests later. It's interesting because their test is not always the same. They have different patterns on each test, kind of like a snowflake. And then there's the slate pencil urchin. You can see on the left what it looks like, and on the right, the shell. And I just think the shell of this guy is just so beautiful.
This is my favorite urchin. I love finding these when I'm out diving. I feel bad because I want to play with them, but I also don't want to harass them. It's very conflicting for me, but I think that they are really, really interesting.
Yes, I agree. The next one is I've seen several times, but it's pretty rare and it's just so beautiful. The magnificent urchin. And if you see it live, you'll see this iridescent purple in between the spines. Generally, they tend to be deeper water, although I've seen them in relatively shallow water, and their test is very fragile. So right now, the only one we have in the museum is a little bit broken because it's hard to get one of these guys that doesn't have a broken test because they are just a little bit thinner. Okay, so sea urchins are important. They're just not pretty things. I think they're pretty. But they also have some purposes that we use them for. In some places, we actually eat parts of the sea urchin, like shown here on the left. You can see the 5 different triangles. Those are the gonads, and some people eat them. I know a lot of Caribbean islands eat the gonads. They're also used in research. They eat algae, so they help keep our coral reefs clean, especially the diadema. They help keep the substrate clean so that corals have a place to settle. And of course, they're food for other marine animals, such as starfish and some fish like triggerfish. So let's move on to the sand dollars. This is the last group I'm going to talk about. They are found in not hard bottom, but sandy shore or muddy bottom. So the bottom has to be soft. They have a star pattern on the top, and you'll have a chance to see that, but that star formation is where they have tube feet come out that are actually specialized for breathing. The mouth is on the underside of the animal. So let's look at some of them. Here are some sand dollars from different areas. We don't have all of these, but we do have a couple of them. And you can see on the bottom right, some of them actually stand up on their side. They're not necessarily flat on the bottom. So which ones do we have here in the Virgin Islands? Well, I've seen 2 different species here. And I know that there's a third one that occurs in some Caribbean areas. I haven't found it here. I'm still looking. The first one is the 6-holed sand dollar, which is on the top. And the left is the test when it's dead and you find it on the beach. And on the right is a picture of a live organism. And it's a whole different color because it has spines, tiny little spines all over it, which fall off when it dies. Below is another type of sand dollar. And again, you can see the difference between the dead and the live. Next slide. And you can go ahead and start the video, Joe. So this is a keyhole sand dollar, and they do move. If you watch this guy carefully, you can see that he's actually going down. He's burrowing. Again, they tend to, all the chinoderms tend to be nocturnal. So during the day, you might find him on the top, but during the night, you might find him on top where he's feeding. But during the day, he's very likely underneath the sediment. And this guy is burrowing down into the sediment. Soon he'll be gone, but we don't need to see all that because we have other things to look at.
But it's so exciting.
Yes. Sometimes I try to collect sand dollars for our students and during the day, and all I see is little tiny bubbles coming up from the sand. And if I dig down, I can often find one because during the day, they're down there, but they still have to breathe like all animals. Okay, so let's move on to sea biscuit, which tend to be a little bit thicker than the sand dollars. And we have several species here. The first one here is probably the most common type. This one's always found on the surface. And because of that, often you find it not decorated, but kind of covered. If you look on the right, he's got seagrass on it, and sometimes they have stones. Scientists used to think this was for camouflage. And then I've read papers where actually they've shown that this is more for sun protection because they don't bury into the sand. On the left, you can see a live one. Again, it's got these tiny little spines all over it. You can see the star-shaped pattern on the top where they breathe. They have specialized breathing tube feet. The next one is the hard urchin. This is much bigger. These guys go into the sand as well. And I've got a top and a bottom view of the test. Some people call this the red heart urchin. And they sometimes leave trails in the sand so you can tell where they are and you can dig them up if you wanted to see it. The next slide is the groove burrowing urchin. Now I find these pretty often on the beach, the shell. But honestly, I've never found the live organism. But this is what it looks like.
It is beautiful and fuzzy, and I'm in love.
Well, wait till you see the next one. All right, so this is a giant heart urchin. Now this one's a little rarer. I found, I don't think, about 6 or 7 of them over the years I've been here. But the live organism I've never seen. It is bizarre looking. And I would love to see it someday, but this is what it looks like. And it's out there, just not that visible to us. And now I guess you can just show the last slide, Joe, just to show who we are. I'm going to be turning it over to Debbie in a minute, but before I do that, I want to talk about some actual tests that I have found, and so you can get a closer look. Okay, so can I go live, Joe?
Yep, we're looking at what you're looking at. Show us, and wow, there's some incredible tests here.
So this is the the sea egg that I talked about. This is a large one, but of course they come small. This is the diadema, or the long-spined sea urchin. Much more fragile. If you look at this microscopically, you can actually see the lines are very different than the other urchins. It can often be confused with the boring urchin, which tend to be more oblong and not so round as the diadema.
So Marcia, can I ask, yeah, what are some of the ways that when you encounter one of these tests on the beach, how you're able to identify these differences? Sounds like
so
some of the shapes, and yeah, talk some more about
yeah,
that.
well, I mean, you can see that the first one is very different from the others, the sea egg. But the other two, the boring urchin and the diadema, they both have knobs that are prominent. In this one, the diadema have a very round test, whereas the boring urchin will be oblong. If you had a microscope, you could actually look down and see how the little some of the other knobs are different from this one. But the general way is by looking at the shape. So the other sea urchin in front is, again, my favorite, the variegated. And if you could look at all four of them, you can see that the pattern on each one is slightly different. Even though they're all the same species, they have a different pattern on them. And I think this is great.
Those are beautiful. And I love looking at the tests. The symmetry is so much more obvious. And I know from very limited research that I've done in the past, just for outreach activities, the symmetry is actually very important in echinoderms, but seeing them live versus the tests, I think really gives you an interesting viewpoint as how that symmetry really lines up with the animal.
Right. Okay, so now I've got your favorite one here, Kitty. You can see this beautiful test and what the animal looks like. This guy hasn't lost all his spine yet. This is the pencil slate urchin. And now let's move on to the sea biscuits. This is the heart urchin. Okay, this is what we find washed up on our beaches. And then related to that, you can see that this one is more oblong. I like to think of it as being diamond shaped. You can see again the star shape on the surface, the top and the bottom. You can see it's a filter feeder. So the sediment goes in, they take nutrients out of it, and then it comes out the end. And they excrete that.
The texture of those is absolutely beautiful.
I know, I love them. And then the groove boring urchin. And then finally, the sea urchin, the sea biscuit. Now this guy here, the one that I talked about decorating itself, this is a heavy one, a substantial one. Okay, so it's different from the other ones. And then the the sand dollars, you can see the one without the holes, and then the 5 hole sand dollars. Again, you can see the holes they eat from, their waste. So that's the echinoderms. Now I am ready to turn it over to Debbie Gordon, who will talk about other aspects of our museum. Welcome, Debbie.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, welcome, Debbie. Hi.
Hi.
It looks like such a beautiful day over there. I am with you guys.
It is a beautiful day today. Humidity is not too high. I'm a member of the Seashell Society, and I'm an amateur conchologist, which means I used to collect shells when we were allowed to take them off the beach here on St. Croix. Now I have to go other places where you're allowed to still take the shells off of the beach to collect shells. So I do want to show you all the cases, and then I'm going to talk about some of my favorite shells and some of the reasons that they have certain colors attributed to them. So I hope in the audience we have some seashell collectors, some people that love seashells. Everybody here at the Society really does love seashells and all of the aspects of them. So let me go and show you all the cases again. Sharon told you that this case has seashells only from Africa in it. This is the echinoderm case where all of the urchins and dollars are housed and photographs of them, and everything in the museum is marked with the name and when it was first discovered. It is the bivalve case. Bivalves have two sides. That's why they're called bivalves. Just every shell in here has two sides to it. Some of them we eat, the clams we can eat, the scallops we eat. This cabinet over here is seashells from around the world on the top few shelves. And then towards the bottom, we have different things that artists have made with seashells. This is an entire salad set there, I think from the Philippines, I'm not positive. And this tree down here is made of all little teeny tiny shells wired together with copper wire.
That looks like it could be
It's really
a perfect
beautiful.
Christmas tree.
And we have, isn't it awesome? And if anybody would know what these things are down here, they're not seashells. They were made into earrings. So those are operculums. Somebody painted them. The operculum is what covers the end of the shell, helps that guy stay in there. So someone took these operculums and turned them into earrings. And then this cabinet over here is my favorite cabinet because this one is all seashells from St. Croix. Start on the bottom, big guys. All of these have been donated to the society. As I said, we're not allowed to collect seashells here, but way back when we were allowed to, people collected them and they've donated them to us. This is one of our newest shells. This is on loan to us. This is very different from anything I've ever seen my 40 some odd years collecting shells. It's called an Argonaut. It's also called a paper nautilus. The octopus spins this. There's several types of octopus. This particular octopus spins the shell around its body, lays its eggs in there, and that's how it manages them while they start to grow. I've never seen one. Someone found this after one of the storms. It's incredibly fragile. It's also a very large specimen. So if you're really interested in shells, try to get in here and see this while we have it, because we don't own it. It's just been lent to us.
That is absolutely amazing. And I have never heard of that. That's so cool.
It's a find of a lifetime, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody on St. Croix, go now and look at it. After we're done.
There you go.
We're done with Science Saturday.
So this is our conch exhibit, our queen conch exhibit. And as DP, Department of Parks, and I guess the Natural Resources lent this to us or gave it to us. It starts here where the conch is 4 months old. So it looks like he's about an inch there. And it continues around. This is 10 months old. We've got a 1.5 years old over here. And as you can see, it's gradually getting larger and larger. Here it's 3.5 years old. And now at 3 years, you can start to see how that lip is getting thick. And then here at 4 years old, they've built that whole lip out. By that time, they have laid eggs, and that's when we are allowed to harvest them. We're not allowed to harvest these anytime before this big shell has made that side to it.
That is very important and good to know that the size restrictions are based on the growth and reproductive process of the animal.
Correct.
And they're delicious, and so we want them to keep on growing and making more of them.
So then I brought a few of my favorite shells, and we can maybe talk about some of the colors and how they get their patterns very quickly. Let me just lay some of them out here so you'll probably be able to see them better here. All right. And this guy. Here we go. All right. So some of these shells make patterns because it's genetic. That's just the way it is. And you can see these two guys here, they're just about identical. One's a little bit larger. That's genetic. They do that genetically. That's what they're made to do. This little shell is pink, very pink. These shells, scallops, these kind of bury themselves in the sand. And that's why they're pink. They kind of blend in as a camouflage. This is another camouflage. You would never know this was a shell. Here we go. So if you ever saw that, you would never think that that was a shell. It's so well camouflaged, but as you can clearly see, there was a shell. This guy was living in here. This guy, there's a whole set of shells called hairy tritons. And this is one little teeny tiny guy. You can see the hair on him, can you?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, he's like a little bundle of fur ball there. A little guy. So then I also brought this milk conch. And I think you can probably tell why it is called a milk conch. It really has that wide lip that is white, kind of milky. And I too brought carrier shells because they are my favorites. This guy picked up rocks so well, so symmetrical. And this guy was a little better at it. He picked up some pretty little shells. So that's about all I have for you today. One thing is blue is apparently the color that's the rarest. And I just have a blue mussel shell to show you.
Those are beautiful.
That's my little presentation.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for that tour. I think that was really interesting. We do have just a few minutes before we've hit the hour, so I want to just thank you.
We have a question here too, by the way. Our photographer, Lily, who's trying to get away from the camera, has a question. Okay. Lily, who's 25 today, happy birthday. What is your question?
I wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit more about operculums and what those are.
I'd be happy to. So Deb was talking about the conch, and here we have a conch, and in my hand is the conch operculum, which acts as kind of a door protecting it, but also it uses it to walk. And the conch, of course, this conch has a hole here, which meant that somebody harvested it and took its meat to eat. This is the whelk shell, the other type of gastropod that we eat here in the Virgin Islands. And the operculum for the whelk shell is this, this black disc, which is not calcified, unlike some other operculum. Okay, it protects it. And some shells have a stony or a calcified operculum. This is a turban, and you can see his operculum is very thick, made of calcium carbonate. Again, it protects it from other organisms. So some of them are stony, some are chitinous, but they all protect from other organisms. Thanks for that question, Lily.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
We have a question from the audience. And I think that this is something that we're all thinking, to give you guys what you can and cannot take. What are the laws against removing seashells from the beach and collections?
Well, Virgin Islands law does prohibit the collection of seashells, corals without a proper permit. And to get the shells in this museum, the St. Croix seashells, both Marcia and I have had permits issued through DPNR to collect seashells. They are very limited. I can only collect 100 species and only 5 specimens of that. So
for educational purposes.
Yeah, for educational purposes. That's what we, thank you. That's what we can only collect them for educational purposes. It's not to sit on the dining table.
And so can we talk about why is it important that we keep these shells on the beach? Why is it important that we don't remove all of these shells when we find them?
Well, empty shells, as you know, can be used by the little hermit crabs, octopus. Sometimes when I'm diving, I'll find an octopus in an empty seashell, and eventually seashells break down into sand. So if everybody took all the seashells off the beach, then we would lose homes for our octopus and hermit crabs and limit our amount of sand that's generated.
Yeah, and sand is a very important natural resource for us here in the Virgin Islands. You know, the beaches are beautiful and, you know, it's nice to go look at the sand and walk on the beaches, but that's so important for our shoreline protection and weekends. We need our sand, right? That's very
Right, they're
Yes.
of me to say.
a really important part of our shoreline. In fact, one thing that I've been thinking about this whole time, coming from coral research, of course, we were actually in the last Science Saturday talking about coral skeletons, and now we're talking about, you know, mollusks and echinoderms, both of which use the same material the coral skeletons are made of, calcium carbonate, slightly modified. It's a different form, but it's all the same material. And so removing that from the system means that it can't be used and reused, not only in beaches, but then ultimately back into the ocean. So it's a really important point, and it's really interesting that this one kind of compound, calcium carbonate, is so important for so many different species and can make so many different incredible shapes.
Right. There was one other thing I wanted to mention because it relates to our organization and what we're doing in the future. We do give educational programs, and we receive money from the Virgin Islands Council of the Arts, as Sharon mentioned. One of the things we're planning, hopefully in this year, is doing a conch shell orchestra. And they blow them, and each shell has a certain note. And so if we have a lot of people with different notes, we can put together an orchestra. And we're hoping, we used to have one here on St. Croix many years ago. We're hoping to put that back together. In addition, we're going to continue educational programs, and we're hoping to make a mosaic this year as well here at the gardens.
That is amazing. I think that the blowing of the conch shell is so beautiful and interesting and culturally important, and I cannot wait to hear more about that. I'm not going to say that I'm good at it, but I have managed to produce a sound out of a conch shell at a wedding party or two. So not to brag, but I'm adequate.
We should also say that we do have the seashell mosaic project underway. We have a lot of seashells that have been donated by people that they don't know what to do with them, that they have them. So the plan is to create a seashell mosaic here at the garden that will be a permanent installation. Someone donated 10 5-gallon buckets of seashells. They've all been sorted, they've all been cleaned, and we're going to start the mosaic. If there's anyone interested in working on the mosaic, I definitely would like you to contact us because I could use some help. So that project's going to start soon, we hope. But again, if anybody has any seashells that they're interested in donating, anything different than what we have, we'll put in the cases. And we love donations.
Awesome. And speaking of donations, you guys are a nonprofit. So let's tell everybody one more time before we're up on an hour. How can we help you? How can we contact you? How can we get you money, volunteers, and shells? All important things.
We do have a Facebook page. So if you go to Facebook and Google St. Croix, and search St. Croix Seashell Society, we should pop right up. I think that might be the easiest way.
It is, and we have a web page that has a donate button on it as well.
All right, awesome. And I think that it's very appropriate to point out that seashells have historically been used as currency. And so how very appropriate that we are asking for donations for the Seashell Society.
And one more question that we have in the comments. I know that we answered it earlier, but if you want to just one more time mention the location and how often are you guys open?
We're at St. George Village Botanical Garden on St. Croix, and we're open when the garden is open, which is Monday through Saturday from 9 until 3.
In the Great Hall.
In the Great Hall location.
And
If
we're
you
on
come-
the map, right?
Yes.
We're on the map also.
Well, the Great Hall's on the map.
I thought our room was.
Okay.
I think.
All right, awesome. Well, ladies, I want to thank you so much again. This was so much fun. I feel like, you know, Joe kind of opened with this, that this is something that is not a topic that either of us are. I'm not an expert in anything, but this has been new and exciting for us. And so I hope that our audience has just a sliver of the excitement that we had. We learned so much, and I just want to give a round of applause for you ladies and our birthday girl photographer who helped you guys out. Thank you, Lily. And once again, Science Saturday, we nailed it. Everybody have a beautiful day. Enjoy this weather. If you're on St. Croix, go to the Seashell Museum, go to the St. George Village Botanical Gardens. There's so much fun stuff there. I should have come over and done this with you guys. Now I'm just sad. But have a wonderful weekend. Everybody enjoy your long weekend. Have a happy Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico Friendship Day, and we will see you next month.
Thank you.
Bye.